Recording in progress. We're recording. Hello, Dave. How are you?
Hi, Sandy. What are we talking about today?
You didn't answer my question. How are you? That's very coach-like to just like skip over the chit chat and go right into it. Love it.
Okay, a little bit chit chat. I'm doing fine. How about you?
I'm fine. Thanks. So we are
What are we
talking.
talking about today?
Do we want to start over? Whatever.
No. Let's
All
just keep
right.
going.
Keep going. So this episode, it's actually a bit of a two-parter that we're going to smush all together in this one episode. And it's a lot. We are going to talk about the topic, or sometimes called focus, of a coaching session. And then we're going to talk about the actual agenda or agreement of a coaching session. And this episode is part of our series on the different parts of a coaching session. We're kind of going through the parts in order. The first part was on how to open a coaching session, and that kind of went on for a while. We were like, blah, blah, blah. I was kind of surprised at how much came out of that simple topic, which is only like a fraction of the coaching session.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Were you expecting it to go that long? I don't know. It felt like a long episode.
Well, I think there always is. When you turn over that stone, you never know what you might uncover underneath.
Well, especially if you're working with David Chen, who likes to research the heck out of everything, which I appreciate, of
Yeah,
course.
I just love to talk about anything. So
Yes, yes. A blessing and a
there's that.
curse, perhaps.
Uh, Probably more curse-like than anything else.
Well, I think for our purposes, it's very good because we got a lot to talk about, a lot to share. So, yeah, so let's start with the topic or the focus of a coaching session. And so, Dave, what do we mean by that? And how is that different from, say, the agenda or the agreement?
Yeah, the client usually brings something to talk about. It could be something on their mind. It could be one thing, or it could be many. The client often brings what they think they're looking for, but be wary. It's likely not what they really want or need. So we'll get into more of that later. So the topic is not necessarily the agenda, and usually is not. It's just an area of discussion to start the conversation.
Right. And one of our lovely mentor coaches, she always says, don't believe the client. And I think this is what she means. Like the client will bring something that they want to work on, but it might not be the true agenda or the real agreement. Yeah, and it's our job as coaches to sort of uncover what that agreement or agenda is. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally.
Speaking of agreements.
I
Yeah,
agree with
so
you.
yeah. Yeah, so how do we as coaches do that to sort of uncover what the real agenda or agreement is in a coaching session?
So yeah, now they've stated a topic or topics, and so we deploy our inquiry skills to try to figure out, what's behind the story that's in there, unearthing the root issue if we can, and then we narrow to today's agenda or agreement. Oftentimes there's multiple topics, so what if
Yeah.
topics come streaming out one after another in endless succession? What do we do about that, and how to narrow? But generally, if you are doing well with your inquiry skills, you can take whatever they gave at the beginning and then start narrowing down to something to work on for that session.
Yeah, how do you do that? Narrow the focus. Some coaches call it funneling down, narrowing down that focus to the agenda. How does a coach do that? But that might be another conversation altogether.
Yeah, we could probably talk an hour just about that
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah, but what are your thoughts on that? Like what if a client brings like a whole bunch for their focus or for their topic? What can a coach do to help narrow that down?
On that note, if there's a lot coming out, you can often ask, how are they related to each other? Because usually, if all these things are all showing up in the same place, there's some thread that runs through all of them.
Mm.
And if you can uncover that, then you can pretty much find that critical thread that if you yanked on it, the whole thing will fall apart and get resolved. So that would be cool to see if you could figure that out. Occasionally there could be things that don't have a clear relationship, so you can move on and then ask them something like, which one feels more important to you today, or top of mind, or what would you like to focus on today, and we can leave the rest for next time or another session. Um, but yeah, if you can find the relationship between all of them, then you might actually solve all of that that seem to be separate topics. Um, when you ask, you might consider the questions you ask, and especially ones that potentially could open it up again. So you were right in the process of trying to narrow down to something that we could work on today, but you might actually inadvertently or by design or accidentally, whatever, derail that narrowing. So just be careful with that, because the language that you use could open it back up, and then you're back to circling again when you could have been narrowing down to the agenda.
Yeah, so instead of narrowing the focus, you're kind of like going the other way and expanding it, which doesn't really help for figuring out what the agenda or agreement is. And I don't know about you, but I find that a lot of clients bring a lot of story. Um, a lot of story, especially in that first opening few minutes. What do you want to be coached on? It's like, bleh. It's like there's a lot of word vomit that comes out, a lot of story. Um, yeah, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? Like, what do you do when a client brings a big, long story to the top of the session?
Two things come to mind there. One is when the client does just unload everything that happens to be on there, a lot of verbal processing, a lot of things coming out, and telling about how they got here and all that kind of thing. And the other one is more almost coach. The coach created the situation where the story got dived into. So either way.
Could you explain that? What do you mean the coach created?
Oh, yeah. So in that case, maybe the person did not necessarily come out with this long kind of drawn out dialogue, but you might start asking inadvertently down the path of, oh, how did they get here, right? What was behind this, and
Got it.
talking about the characters and the players in the story, that kind of thing, or the situation, and it didn't help you narrow to or create the agenda or the agreement.
Right. So you'd be, it goes back to what you were saying about language and asking those expanding or maybe unnecessary questions instead of like getting down to the heart of the matter. Yeah.
Yeah, and there it's almost we got to have curiosity to be good coaches, but here it's almost unbridled curiosity, if you will, where you get lost with the curiosity of going deeper and deeper into their story and what's behind this and what's behind that, and that's brings up the risks of getting drawn into the story, whether they're giving it or whether we're actually facilitating the drawing out the story.
Right.
That you could end up spending a lot of time talking about it. That's one thing. And the other one is you're not getting closer to the agenda or what they want out of today's session. So either way, it can take up a lot of conversation, a lot of time. You might get thrown into a different place that you didn't expect to end it up. And if the session could actually get over before anything gets done, and then you just had a conversation, which is not coaching. So lots of things to watch out for there.
Yeah, good points. I'm thinking about story and like when a client starts talking, blah, 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 and then they say, for example, and it's like, oh no, here it comes. Or they start offering dates and times. It's like, well, I remember back in 2020 when my sister, blah, blah. Well, actually, no, I think it was 2019. It's like, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The timeline doesn't matter. What's matters is like you here now, client. But so that just random question here. What do you do when a client goes off like that? Like, do you interrupt them? What's your take on that?
Sometimes skillful interruption could be helpful there if they're really taking off in a different place. Oftentimes what you can do is keep relating it back to what they said before, right? Back to the topic, back
Mm-hmm.
to this. Oh, that's interesting that you're talking about your dog now. How does that relate to the initial problem they had, and keep trying to draw them back to the original thing. So that could be one way of handling the story if it starts to keep coming out. Another one could be, it seems like you're avoiding something, right? A narrowing or something like that. What's that all about? Because they could be drifting as you're trying to narrow. That you might sense that they're actually trying to run away from you, pulling it back to what the real problem is. So that also could be useful too.
Yeah, two things came up for me. One, you said skillful interruption. Skillful, which you described.
Stop.
Hey, yo, client, just stop.
Just stop. Exactly.
Stop. Bob Newhart, just stop it. And the second thing, I always forget the
we'll
second.
Have to put that in the show notes, by the way.
Yes, we'll put it in the show notes.
Just the video of Bob Newhart. Yeah.
The second thing came up as you were. Oh, and I forgot. Well, maybe they'll come back. What was the last thing?
Back or oh my God, I forgot what.
We're recording
so
it.
Embarrassing.
We can go back and listen.
Okay.
Well, if it comes up, if it comes back to me, I'll mention it. Oof, I hate those senior moments. So
not getting any younger.
Yeah, I know it's painful, but harsh reality. So topic. So what else about the topic? Focus topic. What else did we miss before moving on?
Well, first, be okay if the client is truly moving to another place. They often start with something in the beginning. They say, I want to talk about this. And eventually you may find that they're kind of drifting towards what really is the issue of the day. And that's okay. So be okay if that happens and roll with it, and always check back to see, hey, we started here, we're ending up here. Where do you want to go now?
I remembered what I was going to say. Go ahead.
Okay, good. I was like, she's crossing her fingers. What's that mean?
I remembered.
Got it.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Another thought that came to mind was, what if the client doesn't have a topic? And so usually what happens is the session will open and we'll go, oh, what do you bring to coaching today? And they go, I'm not sure. I'm not, I don't have anything or something like that. But you can always ask something like, what would help you come up with a topic? Right. So then it kind of takes it to a higher level, and then maybe something might emerge from there. Another thing to note is potentially there could be nothing to be coached on today. Then it brings up questions of, do they need to continue coaching? Maybe they're at a good place, or maybe today is just a check-in, right? They are on the path to something and there really isn't something new to report or new to work on. So that also could be possible too.
Yeah, good points.
Yeah. What else?
Good points. Well, I'm curious, and I'll get to what I remembered from earlier in just a second. But what happens if you are you're narrowing down and you sense something, or you see something, you hear something, and if you see something, say something, right? So if you're, for example, seeing a client sharing a lot of story, but there's some anger and some grief and pretty big emotions under there. And I'm not talking about, acknowledging them and going into therapy zone. We don't have to do that as coaches, but what happens if you if you acknowledge that and say, hey, client, I'm noticing this grief or this anger, however you want to put it. What if the client doesn't want to go there? You've narrowed it down to that. You see it, you're intuiting, that this might be it, client. What if they don't want to go there? What happens?
I don't know. What if?
I mean, well, my response is that the client, it's their session, so the coach has to leave it, because it's you might think it's in the client's best interest, but they might not be ready to go there, and we need to honor that. And that's happened to me with a client with grief and anger, and it was coming up a lot in sessions, and I kept pointing it out, and finally I was like, do you want to go there? Not with that exact language, but she gave me a hard no. She was not ready, and I was like, okay, I did my job. I pointed it out. I let you know what I'm seeing. Maybe created some awareness. Maybe that's all she could handle right there. But yeah, sometimes it's hard to let go of that.
Ooh, that is a really good topic for another podcast, I think.
I'll write it down. I'll
Yes,
write it
please
down.
write it down.
Yeah, and speaking of writing down, I wrote down what I remembered.
Yeah, please
What
go.
you had said earlier of saying, "Hey, client, it sounds like you're avoiding something," and I just wanted to add, like that's a ICF, that's direct communication right there. So yeah, it's, and again, like with emotions, like it's up to us as coaches to directly communicate skillfully, communicate honestly, openly, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're sensing. So yeah, I like that. If they're going around in circles, maybe they're avoiding something. Yeah.
And to do it with compassion and caring
Mhm.
too, depending on the situation. If it's a
Right.
sensitive, emotional thing, you don't want to go, why are you avoiding that?
Skillfully, David.
Yeah. But
Skillfully.
if it's something, some other thing, it might be appropriate to kind of shock them out of it. It's like, hey man, you're avoiding that. Come on, what's the deal here? Right, kind of thing. I don't say that. That's not real
Right.
great coaching inquiry, but
Well,
something like that.
I
And
mean,
a
if you
challenge, you could challenge them, right?
challenge them, absolutely. And future episode on trust, safety, rapport. Like if you are feeling comfortable with that client, yeah, maybe you can just like throw it out there and be super direct because you know the client knows you well and can take it. But yeah, maybe not in the first session, but intuition, trust that intuition.
Definitely so.
Um, yeah. So what else about the topic? Are we clear on the topic?
Yeah, I think so. I think we covered it pretty fully.
Yeah. Okay. So the topic, let's review. So the topic is not the agenda or the agreement. It's just the thing that the client brings to the session. Would you say that's fair?
Yep.
All right.
And now let's talk to getting to the dreaded agenda.
Ooh. So, well, first of all, we've been saying agenda agreement, and I forgot to turn off my landline. Ooh, bad. Yes, I have a landline. We're gonna let it ring 4 times, people. I'm so sorry. Do we have some hold music we could play right now? One more time and it'll be done.
Well, it makes the podcast real that
It's-
we don't have any fake backgrounds. I actually live here,
right.
and
Okay, we're done.
well, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. So yeah, we've been tossing around these 2 words, agenda agreement. Could you explain what that even is and its purpose within a coaching session?
Yeah, so I think the most succinct way I found to define this is the purpose of the agenda or the agreement is to help the client clarify what they want to accomplish in their coaching session. And it helps the coach align to what the client wants to accomplish.
Accomplish. So this makes me think that this is the outcome, like what the client actually wants from the session. Is that correct?
Well, that's kind of loaded.
It is. And you've seen the doc. I have questions, David. David Chen, I have questions.
Tough questions you've written for me here.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Uh, and I
Yeah.
guess what I mean by loaded in this case is
Mhm.
they put forth the what they want, and then you got to check, right? You got to, and we'll kind of get into some of the components of the competencies in a second, but they kind of talk about, how do we know that this is really what the client wants or needs at this moment? So
Right.
that's
Right.
where I feel that there's a lot of loadedness where it isn't, it could be that thing if you did a great job narrowing,
Mhm.
or actually could change to something else along the way.
Right. Right. Okay. So for us, for today, we're going to look at this agenda agreement thing from 2 angles. One, the National Board competencies, and also from the ICF, the International Coach Federation, from their competencies and markers. Where do you want to start? Should we start with ICF?
Sure. ICF sounds like a great place to start.
Yeah, do you want to explain those markers, PCC markers, competencies?
Sure. So looking at the ICF agreement competency and its components, going through them one by one, there's 4 kind of parts to it. 3.1 officially is coach partners with the client to identify or reconfirm what the client wants to accomplish in this session.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on that?
Let's get into it. So we have the opening, the discussion of the topic, and then we have the agenda and agreement. But I'm looking at this word accomplish. So for me, that means outcome. So does this cover 2 things? 1, what they want to talk about, and 2, what they want at the end of the session? Or is it just the outcome? Is that what's meant by this marker? What do you think?
The word outcome feels slightly different than what they want to accomplish. Outcome almost feels like the resolution, something that they want to resolve. And accomplishing what they want in the session is sort of how do they get to that resolution? I don't know. Maybe it's the word outcome that you put forth here. That I'm
thinking, I'm thinking as health coaches, many of us say, what would you like at the end of the session? And to me, that's this marker. Like, what do you want to accomplish in this session? So yeah, maybe outcome is not a great word, but yeah, so I don't know. 3.1. And I just want to go back and say, when we say PCC markers, PCC means professional certified coach. And these are sort of the markers that ICF uses when they're reviewing sessions to see how coaches are doing.
Definitely so. Yeah. Shall I move on to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
3.2. Coach partners with the client to define or reconfirm measures of success for what the client wants to accomplish in the session.
So what do we mean by measure of success? What does that mean?
To me, measures of success can be deceiving in the way it's stated. For me, the word measures implies something numerical, which it can be. It could be that. And if it's often easy to measure if it is something that is numerical in nature. However, measures can also be non-numerical, like achieving some state of being or being on the path to that state. So improvements in feeling, say, for a certain issue can also be a way of measuring success. And there are many more than that too. So, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I guess just be aware that when you work with a client, you might want to tell like how they want to move towards a desired state, right? And there can be many ways and forms to figure that out for a client. But it would be nice and important for someone to have that, the client to be able to know how they're getting closer to that goal or not.
Right. And I just want to say this one was so hard for me to figure out and comprehend because we didn't learn this in our health coach training. And it's not a competency in the national board guidelines, which we'll get to in a minute. But yeah, like you said, it can be something very tangible, like what would you like at the end of the session? Oh, I want a list. Client says, I want a list. That's very tangible. Okay, when we have a list, we know we'll have accomplished what you wanted. But yeah, it can be something very non-tangible, like a feeling, like you mentioned, like, an awareness in the body, like I have this tightness in my gut. I want it to go away. I would leave it at that. It's like, okay, so, and at the end, we'll talk about the end later and looping back. How's your gut? How's your stomach now? Is it still tight? How did we do? Like check in, right? The scale, the 1 to 10 scale is great for this. Like, well, I want to feel more at peace. Well, how at peace are you now with 1 being totally not at peace and 10 being completely at peace? Well, I'm at a 1. And then you want to ask, where do you want to be at the end of the session? Because don't assume it's a 10.
Mhm.
Most clients are like, you know what? I'd be happy if I were 2 or 3 at this point. Great. Now the client knows where we're headed, you know where we're headed. So you're both on the same track. So I love this competency. Now that I understand it, now that I get it, it is so important to measure because it keeps the structure, keeps everything tight and on track.
Yeah, as you were speaking, there's a concept that comes from uh, more rehab disciplines from a physical training standpoint where we call it test retest. So you basically ask, like, how are you doing right now? Oh, I'm anxious and, upset, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the session, after you've gone through all this stuff, you ask, oh, in the beginning you felt anxious and said, how do you feel now? And hopefully they'll say, oh my God, I feel so much better. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Very cool.
All right. The next one.
Mm-hmm.
3.3, coach inquires about or explores what is important or meaningful to the client about what they want to accomplish in this session.
So this is one of the very first questions I will ask after a client presents their topic. And it might be as obvious as like, what is important about wanting to change your diet, client? But you mix it up, so it's not always that obvious. Sometimes in their word vomit, not that it's always word vomit, but if they have a big story they're given to you, you can hear why it's important. So, client, I hear this is important to you because you're feeling overweight and you want to have more energy for your kids. What do you think? But yeah, and hopefully they'll expand on it, but having them verbalize what's important is important, I would say.
Yeah, that vocalization stuff is probably yet another thing we should talk about, but
The
getting them
what
to,
the what stuff?
sorry, the what?
The what stuff, did you
Oh,
say?
vocalization of,
Oh,
and the
yes.
power of that,
Hmm.
getting them to say it and to acknowledge it and having them hear it themselves say something can
Hmm.
often lend a lot of power and energy to their wanting to actually do this
In their own words. Yeah.
in their own, yeah, in their own
Yeah.
words, for sure.
Another topic. Another topic for another episode. I want to also pick this word accomplish out again. So is this about the outcome? And once you have that quote unquote outcome, what they want at the end of the session, do you ask again? Why would this be important? What do you think? Or is that beating a dead horse with a stick? Is that too much?
Personally, I find a lot of these competencies blur into each other.
Mm-hmm.
They can almost be done. One statement or one question or one reflection could potentially fit into a whole bunch of places. So, yeah, you could ask it again if you want. If you were trying to generate a recording, yeah, throw it in there again, just in case the reviewer might have missed it the first time.
So you're suggesting these are not linear?
No,
Yes, thank you.
or at least not in the order of the 1 through 4, which is coming up in a second.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
oftentimes they feel a little bit better if we rejigger them.
Mm-hmm.
But
Agree.
shall I do 3.4 and we can talk
Yeah.
about potential better rejiggers?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the last one is coach partners with the client to define what the client believes they need to address to achieve what they want to accomplish in the session.
Can you explain this to me? Please. Please explain this to me.
Oh, man.
Mm.
Well, partners with the client. So coach is not saying, oh, I think you need that, or I think this would be good, or even subtly or not so subtly suggesting something. But working with the client, asking them questions, what would be valuable to them, how they would do it, how they resonate with what they came up with. Do we need to be a thought partner with them to brainstorm with them, or Is there something they know that they want to put back into their kind of life mix? So that's where, to me, the key word is partners versus
Hmm.
being more directive or not listening to the client and how they want to do things. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm focusing on the last half of the sentence. It's interesting you went for the first half.
It's that damn word accomplish.
It is, but also defining what the client believes they need to address to achieve what they want to accomplish in the session. For me, this might, I don't know, this might change the whole agenda, because if they come up with something like, well, actually, for me to achieve XYZ, I need to do ABC. And I don't know, it seems like, and also it's like, if they knew what they needed to do, why are they in coaching? You know, they might not know. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, what you said there could mean that they knew, but there's a barrier to them actually implementing that.
That's true. That's true.
That might come up too.
Where a coach could come in real handy.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about this being non-linear. This might even come before the measure question, marker 3.2.
Yeah. And some of this implies the risk management and planning and all that kind of stuff too. And a little bit of this here. So that could also be in there too.
Hmm. So, yeah, what else about these markers is coming up for you?
Nothing like that, but I was curious about what order might you think might be better approached in a coaching conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. So here's I don't know. It's like every time I look at this, I want to rearrange them. And it's like, thing is, it doesn't matter. They're nonlinear. As long as you get them in the first part of the session so you're clear on what the client wants, that's what really matters. But this is sort of how I see it. So we got the focus. And then 3.3, what's important about this? 3.1, what do they want to accomplish in the session? After some exploration, of course. 3.4, what needs to be addressed for us to achieve that? And then 3.2, how will we know when we get there? Do you approve?
It sounds great to me.
I'm glad you approve.
Well, when we throw the chaotic nature of the client, some of these might get rearranged just by how they respond and what they're throwing out there to us too.
That is so
there is
true.
that.
There is that factor. It's not just about us.
That's right.
It's never about us. It's never about the coaches.
There you go. So that was ICF. What about the
ICF,
national
yeah.
board competencies?
Yeah, so the national board, they have what's called practical skills guidelines, and they're just that, they're guidelines. And I'd say they are quite a bit more loose than the ICF markers. The national board, they have 18 competencies. This is from September 2022. They kind of rearranged everything, so there's 18 competencies now. We'll put a link to the new guidelines in the show notes. But these 18 competencies, sometimes they line up and sometimes they don't line up with the ICF competencies and markers. So it's interesting, but the national board, they do have two categories, satisfactory and unsatisfactory. And they call these observables, which is a hard word to say. So there's satisfactory observables and unsatisfactory observables. There's just these two columns. They're kind of very loose suggestions, maybe, as to what you should and shouldn't do. And there isn't really a competency that speaks specifically to the agenda or an agreement. Although I will say Competency C, which is titled Client-Centered Process, this speaks to setting an agenda a little bit more than the other competencies. And you'll see some of the same things as the ICF markers. There's two in particular that are similar. The first is invites the client to choose the area of focus for the session. This is similar to 3.1, although the ICF says what the client wants to accomplish for the session. So here we go with focus topic and so the word agenda isn't even there. But the second one that's similar is the national board says elicits from clients how this focus is too important to them. So that's the same as the ICF marker 3.3. But yeah, the word agenda or agreement isn't even said here. But then there's also this. Under the satisfactory observable column, evokes details from client to support self-discovery of an agenda for exploration. Coach keeps pace with client self-discovery. So now we have the word agenda. So it's almost like, okay, we invite the client to choose an area of focus, topic, and then we as coaches are encouraged to help our clients figure out the agenda. I'm using the narrowing down hand signals here, that funnel, to figure out the agenda. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
What's coming up for me is that the ICF competencies used to look like what the national board competencies were. And about, is it 2 years now ago? They switched to the ones that we just read, the 3.1 through 4. So there's been a lot of development on their end to go from it was 17, now they're 18 at national board, to I can't even remember how many there are officially in the ICF ones.
There's 37 markers now.
Yeah, but there's kind of there's less than 17 big categories.
Right.
Yeah, with lots of sub parts to each one.
Right.
So there seems to be difference. We could go do research on, we could talk to our secret people in both camps and see.
That's right.
Yeah, where the evolution's going and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it does affect recordings and training and all that kind of stuff. So be aware of that if you're going for your national board or if you're going for ICF.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this in the year 2030, things may have changed. That's a good point, talking about the evolution of things shifting and changing, becoming more clear, becoming a little different here and there. But I will say that the outcome question and the measure of success, like these are missing from the national board competencies, which I think it's a pretty important part of the session. So you have that definitive endpoint in mind. Yeah, and this is missing from the national board competencies for its practical skills guidelines. So yeah, that's something I really like about the ICF markers for the agreement. And that's what the ICF calls it. They call it an agreement. So it's not just one thing, it's 4 things: the outcome, the importance, the measure, and then what needs to happen for us to get there. And the national board is just not as specific.
And what I've read about why the agreement and agenda is so important, and it's like the only thing that a lot of people look for in the PCC recordings, if you ever go for your PCC, but it's such, and you could be messing up or not so perfect in the other ones, but if you don't get the agenda ones, then you won't pass the recording. It's that serious to them. And my sense is that the research that ICF has done has shown that if you are super clear in a session with somebody on what they want to get out of it, a lot of things get better. Not only do they get what they want and what they really want and all that kind of thing, but even from a business standpoint, think about it. If you go and just have conversations with clients and they're paying you X number of dollars per hour, they're not going to stick around if you're just having coffee talks every time you meet. So it's, yeah, to get really good at it. And then it saves you if something goes a kilter, right? If they said, oh, well, I'm not getting it. It's like, well, no, you said it specifically, you wanted that, right? So there could be some other kind of issues that would be solved by being really clear on, you wanted this, we worked on this,
Right.
versus being kind of fuzzy or loose about it too.
Right. And that gives great value to the client if,
Yes.
if they're getting what they want out of coaching, and it saves time, I would say. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So anything else about ICF versus National Board?
No, not right now.
Picked them apart.
Definitely so.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some things new coaches might want to consider when setting that agenda or agreement with the client?
Right. Lots of things. Some of the things we touched on already. For example, just enough exploration of the topic to uncover what they really want, and don't get lost in the story. Don't explore so much that you're wasting too much time in a session, and then you don't have time at the end to kind of close up gracefully. You might develop your intuition to know when it's the right time to ask for the agenda question. So oftentimes that can be when there's a lot of exploration and there's some sense inside you that says, okay, you know what? We've asked enough questions here. What do you want now? Or given this insight that you just generated, where would you like to move towards from here? But usually there's some moment in there where it's not worthwhile to ask yet another exploration question like, oh, what about that? Or what,
Right, right. Two things I found is that with my session reviews, is that they don't explore enough. The coach doesn't explore enough at the top of the session. Like they just take the focus and they're like, okay, we'll talk about that. What do you want at the end? And there's no narrowing down. There's no narrowing down to that. And the other thing you mentioned, which I think is super important, like you have that initial exploration of the topic. And then, yeah, use your intuition, like listen for that little shift or like something coming forward. And that's kind of your ticket to a good agenda. Like what's shifting for you right now as we're talking? What's coming forward for you? What insights did you just have? I noticed you shifted a little bit. What happened? And that might be like, okay, so is this what you want to focus on for the rest of the session? What do you want? How do we know when we get there? Blah, 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 blah. But yeah, excellent points.
Yeah. Another one is just really being aware of the language you use when you're asking, because even shuttle shifts in the words you might use in a question could either derail and go opening up again, or it may move someone towards a way of thinking. So a lot of us like to say moving towards, what would you like to move towards now with this insight, versus saying, oh, what would you like to do with this? Right? Do, right? All of a sudden it goes boom. I have to do a habit. I want a tool. I want a technique to fix XYZ kind of thing.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. As an example. And certainly there could be many other examples that we can come up with, but yeah, just watching how you ask can drive towards a particular solution or not.
Well, that language moving towards is so gentle. That's also, we have the same MC. That's also why I don't say hop into a session or hop into coaching anymore. It's like, it's kind of jolting, but it's like if you step into coaching.
Sashay into coaching, yeah.
Sashay into coaching. I like that. And something else came up for me and I'm forgetting again. Oh,
cross those fingers. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, you mentioned do and yeah, what do you want to do with that? And yeah, that's action language, right? Doing. I had a client who I don't know what my language was at the time, but she went for those tips and tricks. I was like, what do you want at the end of the session? She's like, I don't know, some tips or maybe a list. And I was like, I called her on it. I called BS. I was like, you don't want that. And we had, good rapport and everything. I don't think I used action language, but it's interesting that that's where she went. Yeah, and then we ended up having a much deeper conversation about what was going on underneath. But I can imagine, like, had I just went with it, You know, it would have been all like kind of action, kind of doing, kind of whatever. And you know, it's a style of coaching. There's something to that, but is it as deep as it could have been? I don't know.
Yeah, right. The in your instance, I think it's the word want. And what comes up for me, especially in a lot of clients I have, is they've already come to the session reading about all the habits and all this kind of stuff. And they think that what will save them and get them where they want is to instill what they've read about in the popular posts and the popular internet, whatever. And usually it's a tool, a technique, it's a calendar thing, it's a structure, blah, blah, blah. And it might be that, it could be that, but that's where I find the word want can be risky because usually they're coming in with a notion of a tool or technique. Yeah, so I wanted that. That's what I thought I wanted. Like, no,
Right.
that's not what you wanted. Probably should have asked in a different way, whatever.
Don't
But
believe the client.
that's right. I don't
Believe
care what you want. This is what I think you want.
Yeah,
No, don't do
exactly.
that.
Yeah. Could you speak for a moment about recontracting?
Yeah.
What does
So,
that mean when you say recontract?
yeah, we haven't talked about the word contracting in context of coaching, but
I don't think we've mentioned it in this session, have we?
but it's kind of synonymous with agreement.
Yeah.
You have an agreement with somebody. That's a contract you have with that person.
Mhm.
So, so I guess re-agreementing sounds a little funny. Recontracting sounds a little better.
Re-agending.
Yeah, recontracting.
Recontracting, yeah.
So often, what times you do have actually set a good agenda or agreement in the beginning, essentially a contract. You go through and do some more talking and coaching conversation, and then you realize, oh, look, we're actually now here. So it
Like
actually shifted.
something is shifted, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Something's changed based on further discussion about it.
And it might be a new topic, but it might be that, yeah, that emotion is coming forward. Good time to recontract and check in, as you say.
Yeah. So at that time, you might want to check in on, well, let's see, we started this conversation here and now we are here. Where do you want to move to from here? Right. That's what a lot of people call looping back. So you want to check in with where we started the conversation or where the agenda was, and now we're here. Essentially, are you okay with that? And where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, I want to add to that. The national board, they're one of their competencies. I'm not going to say which one because they're always changing, but it used to be peer Q, now it's O. But they have a competency that's asking for takeaways at the end of the session. And I always invite, when I'm reviewing a session, I invite those coaches, ask for that anytime during the session. And one of our MCs also, invited us to do that. But as health coaches, I wasn't trained. It was like at the end, what are your takeaways? But yeah, if you ask throughout the session, what's coming forward for you now? What's shifting for you now? Just want to check in. We were here, now we're here. And yeah, maybe something huge has changed. Maybe not. Maybe it's just like an insight, and it's never going to be what you think it is. I've had some clients say some things. I'm like, wow, that's what they're getting from this. Awesome. That is so cool. It's not what I would have said at all. Not my session. But yeah, to check in several times throughout the session, I think is good practice.
Yeah, back to the vocalization, because once you ask that and then they vocalize, oh, I just learned this and that and this, that can create a shift in the conversation just by doing that. So yeah, great point.
Yeah, yeah. So when it comes to our own experiences, like what have you learned when it comes to setting that agenda or agreement?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about a lot of the stuff already. A couple things come to mind. Let's see. First, an MCC. That's a master
Master
coach,
certified coach.
certified coach. Yeah, something like that from ICF. Once noted to me that experienced coaches often just know what the client wants in the session after some exploration. So a lot of this stuff that we talk about in terms of being clear and vocalizing it on our side about the agenda and agreement, a lot of times experienced coaches, especially MCC level, the mastery level, they can figure out what that is without actually stating it. So yeah, that intuition kind of popping up again and forming.
And they can do it a lot faster too.
And they do a lot faster.
Usually. Yeah.
More faster than you and me, probably.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, we touched on this a little bit too. Setting the agenda is, they are sticklers for that in their recordings. So make sure if you're going for ICF certification, and especially the PCC level, which is the second one after the ACC Associate Certified Coach, just to be explicit and to clearly show that the coach has learned this really important skill.
And again, the national board is a little looser with this, but the client's needs must drive the session. And so we're checking in is nice. You have that agenda. Check in. Are we still on track? Is there something else coming forward? Check in with the client. But yeah, I always invite the health coaches who are my students to take a look at those ICF competencies, because this one in particular, setting that agreement, contracting, agendaing, whatever you want to call it, it is so helpful for your session structure and flow.
Yeah, that's right. The next one that's coming up for me is never lose an opportunity for a richer exploration of whatever their topic is.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, don't be afraid of going deep and finding what's the thing behind the thing. Some people talk about that, because that gives you really the opportunity to figure out, well, what really is what they need to solve whatever they're experiencing. Right.
And it might be hard for new coaches as they're building their skills and getting comfortable and confident to know how to narrow the focus and go deep at the same time.
That's right. The narrowing, just having the skills first, and then addressing your own triggers. Why coaches need their own coach.
You just need a coach.
Absolutely. I don't have my hat here. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. And yeah, really getting into, this is also subject for a longer discussion, but a lot of us talk about transactional coaching versus transformational coaching versus transcendental coaching. So a lot of people are really taught just the transactional coaching, and that's fine. It'll get you pretty far. But sometimes you'll find that there's limitations to that too. And if you don't do richer explorations, you'll never get past those. You'll find that there's certain clients, or a lot of clients, that aren't working. They're not working, right? Whatever you're doing with them is not working. And if you want to move towards transformation or transcendental coaching, you really got to get to the root cause of whatever it is they're experiencing. And once you do that, you may find that whatever they're asking for actually wasn't really the thing that they were asking for. One thing that
comes to mind. Don't believe the
client. That's right.
Don't believe the client.
Yeah. One quick thing that I think you probably have encountered too is, let's say it's someone who wants to lose weight. Right. And then you dig further. It's like, well, it could have been like, oh, let's get on a plan to lose 10 pounds and by a certain date and what you're going to eat and all that kind of stuff. But there have been a couple of times when we went deep, we actually determined that it was discomfort with themselves at being this kind of image. And there were definitely at least one of those people was not overweight. There was nothing wrong with their current weight, but it was only the perception of where they were at this point and their discomfort with it. So there was at least one instance I had in the past where it had nothing to do with losing weight, actually. And once we resolved that, then they didn't bother with losing weight anymore because that wasn't what the problem was, even though they came to the session talking about it as if it was.
Right. I find that a lot of clients come to me to want to talk about diet, nutrition, all those wonderful things related to autoimmune disease, chronic illness, and they're important. But it's never about diet. It is never about diet. And yeah, I had one client come to me. She wanted to make healthier habits, which is a great thing to want to do. Third or fourth session in, it came out that she had this belief that she was not worthy. It was huge. And we talked about it, and she couldn't even say the opposite of that. And so the rest of our sessions were like uncovering that, and it was so transformational for her. And it was a joy to work with her, and it was deep, and it was awesome. It was awesome. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, how do you, Coach Shen, help clients move past that? Like if they want those tools and tips and tricks, if they come to you wanting that, like how do you, I don't want to say get them, but how do you invite them to go deeper? And what if they don't want to? I mean, we already talked about that. Like maybe they don't want to. What do you do?
Yeah, damn the habit gurus out there, because they make it sound like that's all you have to do. Only have to do it for 40 days straight and every day and all that kind of magic will happen. I tell people, like, it's just another tool in our toolbox, and it may not be the right one for you. It might be, but until we figure that out, it's not really worth talking about tools and techniques. Yeah, it's one thing that's happened to me is no matter what you talk about or what you explore, person still wants the techniques. And we kind of joke about bullying, meditation bullying and that kind of thing, but maybe there's a richer exploration bullying that can happen too.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, totally. Then I kind of roll with it. I consider it a test for them. And often that's what they need. Some kind of proof that this tool either works or doesn't work for them. And so I let them go try it. I tell them life's an experiment, go try it, see what happens. I invite them to record down when they fail and what's going on in their brain and their what are they feeling when they fail, have compassion for themselves, to not worry about failure, all that kind of stuff, and see what happens. And if anything does come up in those writings, bring them back to coaching. We'll kind of go through them. Oftentimes, we don't know what the client can accomplish on their own. So maybe the tool will help them, even if you think that something else is going on deeper inside them. And sometimes they can do it, and that's great. But oftentimes, we get the feeling that, well, they're probably going to fail here. And maybe they're not ready for that deeper exploration until they're proven that whatever they're asked for, even they're as adamant as they were about asking for that tool or technique, they still needed to be shown that that really wasn't it, that there was something and deeper than that. And that's happened to me a couple of times where I just kind of let them go. I go, try it, try to do this thing or whatever it is, the way you do it. And there are a couple that are still with me, like, we're now, okay, that tool didn't work, did it? And now we're unpacking all the other stuff behind why that tool failed for them.
Right.
Which is always great work to be doing with a client.
Yeah, it's very satisfying. So what else, Dave? Do we miss anything? Any parting thoughts on either the topic or the agreement agenda? This was a long episode again.
We just love talking.
We sure can talk.
I don't think so. As always, we'll leave some resources in the show notes. And where can people find you, Sandy?
You can find me at swansoncoaching.com. What about you, Dave?
CoachDshen.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks for this rich discussion and exploration of the agenda and agreement.
And no bullying here.
No bullying. Yeah, we could go on forever, but we're going to stop here. Thanks for watching and listening, everyone. See you next time, Dave.
Bye, Sandy.
Bye.